Hello, my friend. Or perhaps tonight, I should say. Hello. Follow traveler in the quiet hours. For that is how it feels. You and I here, suspended in a moment between waking and sleep. Hi there, my dear listener. Welcome back, or welcome for the very first time. If your day has been a rush of voices, machines, and the endless pulling of modern obligations, this is our small harbor, where the noise can ebb away. Good evening, my friend. I wonder, have you ever really thought about what it means to be warm? Not just the sensation of heat against your skin, but the way it reaches into you, slows your breath, makes your shoulders drop as though they too have been waiting for this moment. And then, have you ever considered what it is to live without it? To be born, to grow, to sleep, and to dream in a world where warmth is never guaranteed? If you close your eyes, only if you wish, you might picture a narrow street in a long-forgotten quarter of London. It is winter, and not just any winter, but one of those cruel Victorian winters where the fog does not simply drift, but presses, thick and brown, against every window pane, as though the city itself were exhaling its soot-laden breath upon you. Snow has fallen, but here in the alleys, it has turned to a gray crust, trodden down by countless boots, horse hooves, and wheels. It is night. You can feel the cold before you can see it, the kind of cold that bites not with sudden sharpness, but with a slow and patient claim, creeping from your fingers into your bones. Somewhere, behind warped brick walls, there is a family gathered. And here is the part you might not expect. This family, like so many in the Victorian age, are not merely huddling for comfort. They are huddling because every degree of heat is a thing to be trapped, guarded, and held captive in the smallest space possible. Every breath they exhale is another ghost of warmth they cannot afford to lose. They know that night will be long, and in nights like these, long is not a measure of time but of endurance. But before we step inside with them, let me ask you, how many times in your life have you been cold enough to shiver under layers, and yet you knew that eventually relief was coming, perhaps from a thick duvet, an electric heater, a waiting hot drink? Imagine instead knowing the opposite, that the night ahead would grow colder before it grew warmer, that your only choice was to pull closer to those around you, not out of love alone, but of necessity. How would that shape the way you slept, the way you spoke, even the way you thought about the person beside you? The Victorians, for all their stiff portraits and layers of etiquette, lived in an intimacy that is almost alien to us. Not the romantic intimacy of novels, but the pressed-together kind born of too few blankets and too many drafts. In a single bed, sometimes little more than a wooden frame, with a sagging straw mattress, you might find not just a husband and wife, but a child or two wedged between them, or at the foot, or in the crook of a bent knee. Bodies became each other's insulation, whether they wished it or not. And the smells, the breath, the unwashed linen of weeks, even months, it all mingled into the air they shared through the hours of darkness. Picture that air for a moment. Not clean and crisp as the outside frost, but heavy with the lived-in musk of wool socks never fully dry, of damp skirts hanging nearby to thaw, of soot from the fire that had burned its last coal before supper ended. Perhaps even the lingering tang of boiled cabbage, because the hearth served as kitchen as well as heat source, and what was cooked lingered in the rafters long after the pot was empty. Now, let me bring you closer still. The fire in this home, if they had one, was not a steady blaze, but a modest cluster of coals, carefully banked under ash, so it might survive the night in a dull glow. You could not waste it on idle crackling. The fuel was too dear, the supply too uncertain. Every family had its little rituals for eking out the warmth. Some slept in their day clothes, some wrapped rags around their feet. Others shared one large overcoat across 3 people like a makeshift quilt. And here, perhaps, is where the modern mind begins to resist. You might think surely they washed more often than this, surely they aired the bed, but no. To strip the bed in winter meant losing the only warmth it had gathered, the faint human imprint that clung to the sheets. Washing, if it happened at all during the frozen weeks, meant a shock of cold water, and a drying process so slow that garments often soured before they were truly clean. And so, the family slept in what they had worn by day, each night adding another invisible layer of history to the fabric. Can you feel how close the walls must have seemed? In such cramped quarters, privacy was a luxury. A child's cough became the room's cough. A parent's restless turning rippled through the straw mattress to the others. Even the creak of a settling floorboard might seem loud in the absence of any other sound but the wind rattling the glass. And beyond that glass, yes, try to see it, the frost had claimed the panes in delicate, feathery patterns. Each one a tiny work of art from a night that cared nothing for beauty. It is strange, isn't it, to think that while we imagine Victorian nights as something out of Dickens or the glowing oil paintings of parlor scenes, so many were instead colored in shades of endurance. The glow of the fire was not a background for conversation, but the centerpiece of survival. And when the cold was at its worst, hygiene, yes, hygiene, the very thing we will be lingering on tonight, was less about what one should do and more about what one could do without freezing. I wonder if you've ever noticed that cold changes how you smell the world. Scents grow sharper in some ways, muted in others. The sourness of unwashed fabric becomes a constant, almost like the timbre of a familiar voice. You stop noticing its presence until you step into the air outside, and the contrast stuns you. In here, in the thick air of the room, it is simply part of the night. And so, we will step gently into this world together. We will walk past the iron bedstead, past the single chair with a mended leg, past the wash basin that holds water too cold to touch after dusk. We will settle, not as guests, but as quiet observers, into the rhythms of a Victorian family enduring the coldest nights, and we will see, not with judgment, but with a certain strange respect, how survival writes its own rules, and how those rules in turn shape every habit, every comfort, every small concession to cleanliness, or the lack thereof. The night is only just beginning, and so is our journey. Then let us settle in more deeply, for the first true step into that winter room is not made with the feet but with the senses. And as we cross the invisible threshold from mere curiosity into quiet observation, we begin to notice the sort of details one only gathers by staying long enough for the air itself to acknowledge you. The heat, if we can call it that, is a frail and stubborn creature here, barely alive, crouching low near the hearth, as though afraid to wander. It does not move like modern warmth, filling a room in gentle, uniform waves. Instead, it clings to surfaces, refuses to climb into corners, and hides in the hollows of human bodies pressed close together. Your own breath, should you allow it to linger, is visible, curling in front of you, a slow ghost that vanishes before it has the chance to warm anything at all. The floorboards beneath you are neither even nor forgiving. They carry the memory of every winter past, the way wood warps and stiffens when it is never truly dry. And every groan underfoot sounds like an old complaint reluctantly voiced. It is here, in the stillness between one sound and the next, that you begin to smell what the family smells, and has smelled for so many nights that it no longer registers as a singular intrusion. The air has layers. Closest to you is the wool, their blankets, their coats, their stockings, all carrying that faint, oily tang of fibers that have been worn day after day, absorbing skin, smoke, and time. Beneath that is the bedstraw's muted musk, not fresh and sweet as the day it was laid down months ago, but pressed into by countless hours of human weight, by the accidental spill of tea, by the drip of melting ice from shoes left too close. Then there is the sharper trace, almost metallic, of the water pail that sits in the corner, its contents already chilled into a glassy surface, untouched since it was poured. That water is not for drinking now. It is for the morning, for the small acts of washing that winter permits, the sort of washing that only touches what cannot be ignored. They do not speak of it as a rule, but in these months, the rules of cleanliness bend until they are almost unrecognizable. It is not laziness, it is calculation. Each time you wash a shirt, you lose the heat it has stored from your body. Each time you change the bedclothes, you trade the faint insulation of lived, in fabric for the stiff, icy welcome of something freshly laundered and barely dry. And so they delay. They choose instead to live in the slow accumulation, in a kind of layered compromise, until spring offers them both the air and the will to strip everything bare. The result is that each night, when they slip beneath the covers, they are stepping into a world built by their own persistence. The faint salt of dried sweat, the ghost of last week's meal still stitched into the fibers of a sleeve, the soft crumble of soot that finds its way onto pillowcases no matter how tightly the window is latched. You might imagine the skin reacting to this in small, private protests, an itch here, a rough patch there, but it is astonishing how the body learns to adapt when choice is taken away. They scratch absent-mindedly, not as an act of shame, but as one more movement in the rhythm of the evening. Even the children know the limits. Their washing is often confined to hands and faces, and even then, the water bites enough to redden their skin. They will complain, but their parents remind them of worse winters past, and how the quick sting of water is still kinder than the long ache of frostbite. The night, meanwhile, has its own scent beyond the walls. When the wind pushes through the cracks, because there are always cracks, it carries with it the smell of coal fires from neighboring homes, mingled with the sour rot of refuse frozen in the street. That outside air seeps in, sharp and almost medicinal in its cold, mingling with the heavier, more human atmosphere inside, until you can no longer tell where one ends and the other begins. This is the air they sleep in. It is not clean by our measure, but it is theirs, and it is constant. The bed itself is less a piece of furniture than a shared territory, divided and redivided each night according to need. In the deepest cold, there is little ceremony to who sleeps where. Warmth is the only hierarchy that matters. A mother may wake to find a child's bare toes pressed against her thigh, searching unconsciously for the nearest source of heat. A father might find himself curled protectively around both, his own comfort, an afterthought to the preservation of the smallest bodies. And when the fire has long since dulled to ash, this human arrangement becomes the only remaining defense against the cold's slow advance. Here, hygiene takes on a different shape. The sweat they produce in the night does not evaporate into some neutral space. It is caught and held by the bedding, absorbed into wool and skin alike. The oils from hair darken the linen over weeks, creating faint halos on the pillow where heads have rested night after night. They do not change these things lightly. To strip the bed in winter is to dismantle a fragile fortress, to invite in the chill that waits patiently just beyond the thin shell of warmth they have built. So they wait, and the bed becomes a kind of living archive of their nights, holding the scent and the shape of their survival. It is tempting to think of this as neglect, but when you stand quietly in the corner, watching them settle in, you see that it is closer to devotion. They tend to each other in small ways, tucking the edge of a blanket under a shoulder, shifting to block a draft, sharing the scant body heat they have without complaint. Theirs is not the hygiene of soap and scalding water, but of shared endurance. And in this space, the unwashed becomes not a mark of disorder, but the unavoidable cost of keeping the cold at bay. If you listen long enough, the room begins to speak in its own dialect. The whisper of fabric as someone turns in bed, the shallow breathing of those not yet fully asleep, the occasional crackle from a coal that still remembers the fire. Beyond these walls, the city sleeps under its blanket of frost, but in here, time has a slower pulse. They are not thinking of tomorrow's errands or next week's bills, they are thinking of making it to morning with the little warmth they have. The dirt beneath their fingernails, the faint grime along a collar, these are not forgotten, only postponed, filed away under the simple truth that no one washes for comfort when comfort itself is so rare. The cold, after all, has a way of teaching its own lessons. It pares life down to what must be done and leaves the rest for a gentler season. And so, in this room, on this night, the family sleeps in the company of all that they have carried through the day, their clothes, their scents, their warmth, and their weariness woven together into something that, though far from clean, is utterly their own. And as the night deepens, you begin to notice that the cold has its own way of lengthening time, stretching each hour into something heavier, as if the air itself were reluctant to move. The family's movements slow to match it. Even the act of turning in bed is measured, deliberate, so as not to spill the fragile pockets of heat trapped beneath the covers. Somewhere near the hearth, a small basin of water sits in wait, and you might imagine it as a silent promise of morning cleanliness. But here is the truth. By dawn it will be colder than the breath in the room, its surface holding that thin skin of ice you can crack with a fingertip. It is not the kind of water one longs to touch. It is the kind that steals warmth from your skin like a thief who has been watching all night. And yet, this is what they will use to wash, if they wash at all, cupping it into their palms to dash against faces, letting the shock clear the fog of sleep, but never daring to linger long enough to feel numbness creep in. The soap, when it is used, is harsh and ungiving, biting into knuckles already red from cold, leaving them dry and cracked. But the smell of it sharp, alkaline has a strange satisfaction, a fleeting moment when you can believe that something has been lifted away, even if you know the rest of your body remains wrapped in the same tired fabric as yesterday and the day before. Clothing here does not belong to days but to entire seasons. A single set of undergarments might serve from the first frost until the thaw, worn until the fabric thins and the seams bear the darkened imprint of the body's own persistence. Wool retains warmth, yes, but it also retains the ghost of every hour it has been worn, and so the scent of a person becomes indistinguishable from the scent of their garments. Removing them would mean surrendering both heat and the familiar shell you have carried against the cold. Even at night, they are not entirely shed, perhaps loosened, rearranged, but rarely replaced with anything clean. To own two of something is a luxury. To wash one while wearing the other is a gamble, for it may never dry in time. So the body learns to live inside its own accumulation. As a tree grows inside its bark, season after season, the floor is another kind of archive. Beneath the bed, in the corners where the broom has not reached for weeks, there is a soft drift of dust, made of whatever the season brings in: ash from the fire, grit from the street, the faint threads that pull away from worn cloth. These are not swept away nightly. They are left to gather until a day comes warm enough to throw open the door and let the cleaning happen without inviting in the frozen air. Until then, each step stirs a ghost of it into the air, invisible unless caught in the dim glow of the firelight. The children play on this floor in daylight, their hands finding small forgotten crumbs or buttons, their knees marked with faint smudges that no amount of hurried wiping can truly remove. At night, when they clamber into bed, they bring the floor with them, its dust, its scent, its small reminders of the world outside the blankets, and the air outside how it waits, pressing against every seam in the room like a persistent hand. You can hear it in the way the shutters rattle, in the occasional sigh through a gap in the frame. It carries with it the city's own mixture. Coal smoke from chimneys where the fires burn hotter than here, the damp metallic tang of the river slipping between streets, the faint animal musk of horses that have passed hours before but left their scent to linger. This air is both enemy and necessity enemy, because it drains the body's heat. Necessity, because without it the room's breath would grow too stale to bear. And so small exchanges happen all night long. A crack in the window that lets in a thread of cold, the rise and fall of sleeping chests that send warmth back into it. There is a kind of quiet surrender in the way they accept this rhythm. Not resignation, exactly, but the understanding that winter cannot be fought head-on. You live alongside it, shaping your habits to its will, allowing certain discomforts to stay because removing them would open the door to worse ones. In this world, the line between hygiene and survival blurs until it is no longer a line at all. What you keep clean is not always what you might expect. The face, the hands, yes, for these are visible. These are presented to the world outside. But the rest is hidden, swaddled in layers that hold their own private history. Even hair, once brushed in the evening, is left until the morning to be dealt with, the natural oils settling in like another layer of armor against the dry air. And yet, there is still pride here. The boots may be worn, but they are polished when the day demands it. The collars, though frayed, are brushed free of crumbs before the family steps out. It is not that they do not know or value cleanliness, it is that they ration it, saving it for the parts of life that will be seen, the moments when appearance is a currency as real as any coin. What lies beneath the surface is theirs alone, unseen by neighbors and strangers alike, carried quietly through the coldest nights until spring grants permission to shed it. If you watch closely, you will see that even in this sparing use of water and soap, there are rituals that bind them together. The mother warming the basin by setting it close to the hearth before anyone wakes. The father pouring the water in steady silence, breaking the ice layer without a word. The children waiting, shifting from foot to foot, knowing their turn will come and the shock will jolt them into the day whether they wish it or not. These small acts, repeated morning after morning, become their own kind of cleanliness, not just of the body, but of order, of predictability, of a shared understanding that in this house, even in winter, there is a way to greet the day. And when the night comes again, the cycle renews itself. They return to their bed, to the warmth they have guarded, to the air that is theirs alone. They do not think of it as squalor. They think of it as what life is in these months. The unwashed sheets are not a failure, but a victory they have. Kept them warm, kept them alive, held together the fragile balance between comfort and cost. And so, with the wind pressing at the windows and the city beyond shrouded in frost, they close their eyes and let the night take them, wrapped in every trace of the days before, carrying it forward into the next dawn. There is a point, somewhere in the deep stretch between midnight and dawn, when the cold changes character, not harsher, but quieter, settling in with the confidence of something that knows it will not be chased away. It is in this muted hour that the smells of the room become more pronounced, as though the darkness itself draws them forward. The bedding carries the layered perfume of wool warmed and cooled 100 times without a proper airing, of human skin lived in for days on end, of hair that is brushed against soot-darkened pillows. The scent is not a sudden assault, but a constant presence, an invisible fabric stitched into the air they breathe. You might think such air would feel oppressive, but they have worn it as one might wear a second skin, barely noticing its weight until it shifts. A child might stir, drawing a corner of the blanket closer to their face, inhaling without thought the same musk that clings to their mother's dress and father's coat, finding in it not repulsion but reassurance, the certainty that this, however imperfect, is home. In these hours, water is not a friend. It waits in its basin, silent and solidifying, a mirror to the thin moonlight that seeps between the warped shutters. The thought of dipping a cloth into it now, of pressing it to skin, would be a cruelty no one here would attempt. Even if they could bear the shock, the moisture would linger, turning cold against the flesh long before it could dry. So the night passes without the touch of water, the only cleansing being the slow exhale of sleep, the shedding of heat into the bed they all share. And in that shedding, they are marking their world, each breath a small, invisible deposit that adds to the room's atmosphere, until morning brings with it the faint fog of life lived in close quarters. The hair, too, tells the season. In summer it is combed through daily, coaxed into place, sometimes even rinsed in the yard with rainwater caught in barrels. But now, in this deep winter, it is brushed only enough to tame the worst tangles, the oils left to coat and protect the strands. It holds the scent of the fire, the kitchen, the bed. Sometimes it even holds the faint grit of ash that drifts down from the chimney and lands unnoticed. And when the family curls into their sleeping places, that hair becomes another layer of insulation, warming the neck and ears, creating small pockets of heat that no draft can steal away. Even the hands, those most exposed and most tended to, bear the season's mark. Washed in the morning, yes, but by night they are dry, the skin pulled tight over reddened knuckles. Soap has taken its toll, as has the constant contact with rough fabric, with coal, with wood. In the darkness, fingers curl instinctively towards warmth into sleeves, beneath blankets, around another's palm. And in that shared clasp, there is a comfort that no amount of cleanliness could provide, the quiet knowledge that you are not alone in the cold. The walls do not insulate so much as they hold the memory of the day's warmth like a fading echo. You can almost feel it if you place your palm against them, cool, but not as cold as the air outside. They sweat sometimes, in the way that walls in winter do, condensation forming in thin trails that trickle down and vanish into the floorboards. This dampness seeps into everything, the hems of skirts, the cuffs of trousers, the rag rug at the bedside. It is another reason the bedding is not washed often, why strip it bare only to lay it back on a damp mattress. Better to keep the accumulated warmth, the softened folds that have already learned the shape of the sleepers. From the street, if anyone were passing, which is rare at this hour, the house would appear still, dark, unremarkable. But within, it is a living organism, breathing in unison. Each shift in position, each murmur in sleep, each creak of the bed frame becomes part of a rhythm that has repeated itself night after night, winter after winter. And hygiene, in the strict sense, has no place in this rhythm except where it intersects with survival. The skin under layers of clothing will not see daylight for weeks. What matters is the preservation of warmth, not the removal of what clings to it. The family knows this, though they do not speak of it. It is not a subject for conversation, but a condition of life, as given as the frost that coats the window each morning. There is, perhaps, a kind of poetry in the way necessity reshapes ideals. In summer, cleanliness is a measure of pride, a signal to neighbors and strangers alike that one's household is orderly. But here, now, in the coldest nights, pride shifts its footing. It is no longer the crisp whiteness of linens that speaks well of a family, but the simple fact that they rise each morning still intact, still able to face the day. The scent that clings to them of smoke, of wool, of the room they sleep in, is not seen as shameful but as proof of endurance. And when the thaw comes, when the first day arrives warm enough to fling the windows open and strip the bed for a true airing, there will be satisfaction in that labor, not disgust. The dirt, the scent, the heaviness of the bedding will all be cast into the sunlight, and in its place will come the brief, clean luxury of spring. Until then, the winter bed remains, as it is a fortress built not of stone, but of every choice they have made to keep the cold at bay. Outside, the frost thickens, glazing the cobblestones until they gleam faintly in the moonlight. The city sleeps under its own breath, smoke drifting upward to meet the clouds. And in this small room, the family dreams, their bodies pressed close, their world reduced to the space they can keep warm together. The air they share is thick with the history of their days, but it is theirs, and it carries them through the long hours until the first pale light of morning. There is a moment, just before the first whisper of dawn, when the cold in a Victorian home feels almost sentient, less like a force of nature, and more like a quiet visitor who has settled in for the night, studying its hosts with patient interest. In that dim, in-between hour, the air is thick with the breath of the sleepers, and yet the chill seeps in, as though drawn by some instinct to find the warmest corners and claim them. The fire, if it still breathes at all, is only a faint glow under a shroud of ash, its heat no longer radiating but clinging close to its own dying embers. The smell of it lingers, smoke that has woven itself into the fibers of everything in the room, into hair, into blankets, into the very boards underfoot. This scent, mingled with the slow accumulation of bodies that have shared the same bed, the same air, the same damp wool, becomes the invisible weather inside the house, a climate as distinct as the frost outside the windows. You can taste it if you breathe deep enough, the tang of coal dust, the faint sourness of linen that has not known soap for weeks, the faint animal note of skin kept under layers too long. It is the kind of air that would startle someone newly arrived from the street, but to those who live here, it is the normal scent of survival. The act of waking in such a space is not the bright, decisive thing we know today. It is a slow surfacing, a reluctant negotiation between body and world. The eyes open to darkness still, for the sky outside has not yet turned, and there is no reason to light the lamp when fuel is as dear as bread. A hand may reach out from beneath the covers, searching for the comfort of another's warmth, and finding it, curl back in rather than brave the cold air. The thought of washing the shock of water that has sat all night in the basin, waiting lingers at the edges of consciousness like a small dread. It is not that they wish to be unclean, it is that the clean comes at a cost, and in this season, the price is measured in shivers that take hours to quiet. The basin itself tells its own story, a thin crust of ice fracturing under the first touch, a sound as delicate as breaking glass. The cloth, once dipped, stiffens in moments, the water clinging to it, turning hard before it can dry on skin. And yet, this is what must be faced before the day can begin. Children are coaxed from their nest of warmth with promises of the fire, though the hearth offers little more than the hope of heat until the coals catch again. Their faces are splashed, their hair smoothed with damp fingers, and the rest is left for another time. The same clothes as yesterday are pulled on, still holding the imprint of the day before, still carrying the mingled scents of home and street and skin. In these months, clothing becomes almost a second body, growing softer, heavier, more shaped to the wearer with each passing week. Washing it would mean surrendering that comfort, that thin shield against the drafts that snake along the floor and through the seams of the walls. So it stays, and with it stays the memory of every hour spent in it. Outside, The frost patterns on the windows have deepened overnight, tracing ferns and feathers in ice across the glass. They catch what little light there is, turning it into a dim, opalescent glow that does nothing to warm the room. The streets beyond are still, save for the occasional rattle of a cart or the muffled strike of boots on frozen cobblestones. Inside, the family moves slowly, each step measured to keep from losing the warmth they have carried from the bed. There is no rush to clear the room of its night smells, no flinging open of windows to invite in the cold light of morning. That will come later, when the sun has risen high enough to give at least the illusion of warmth. For now, the air inside is kept close, every breath still a part of the night that has just ended. The dirt that clings to them is not the grime of neglect, but the sediment of life lived under siege from the cold. A line of ash along a cuff from tending the fire. The faint smudge on a cheek from a pillow that has known too many nights without laundering. The stiffness in the hems of skirts, where the damp from yesterday's street never fully dried. Even the nails tell a story cleaned hastily in the morning, but soon darkened again from handling coal, wood, or the simple business of tending to life in a city that never truly washes itself clean. In the warmth of summer, these marks might be erased daily. Here, they are worn as quietly as a wedding band, part of the unspoken pact with winter. What the family shares is more than space, it is atmosphere in every sense. The small room becomes a sealed world, each body contributing to its heat and its scent, each night layering another invisible thread into the weave. They do not remark upon it because it is constant, and constancy, however imperfect, is a kind of comfort. The idea of perfect cleanliness belongs to another season, another life entirely, one where windows can stand open and linens can flap in the wind. Here, in the coldest nights, they keep what they have, and they keep it close. And when the first pale light finally edges its way into the room, it reveals not some scene of squalor, but of endurance. Faces still creased from sleep, hair flattened on one side, blankets pulled tight around shoulders as the day's first tasks begin. The air will change as the hours pass, coals will be coaxed into flame. The scent of tea or broth will rise, but for now, the room still holds the night, its cold, its breath, its mingled traces of those who have survived it together. And in that quiet, you can almost believe that the dirt and the cold and the closeness are not burdens, but the very threads that hold the fabric of this life together. By the time the day has worn itself thin and the shadows begin to pool once more in the corners of the room, the family is already preparing for the long return to the place where they began the bed that has waited all day like a quiet harbor, still holding the warmth of the night before in its folds. It is not a preparation marked by ceremony, but by the quiet sorting of what will be brought into that narrow refuge. The thick socks that have been kept near the hearth to soften their chill, the worn shawl draped over shoulders before the last coals are covered for the night. The shared understanding that every layer worn to bed is another barrier between their bodies and the advancing cold. The light fades early here, the winter dusk folding itself over the streets until the outlines of the buildings become silhouettes against a bruised sky. And inside, the lamplight takes on a kind of golden density, thick with the smoke of the wick and the faint haze from the fire. In that dimness, the room's smells gather close again, wool and skin, and the day's small labors, the ghost of meals that left more steam than sustenance, the lingering breath of everyone who calls this place their own. They do not bathe before bed. The idea would be absurd in this season. To strip and expose the skin to the air is to invite a cold that does not forgive. Instead, the day's dirt is carried with them into the blankets, mingling with what was already there. Another layer in the long story written into the bedding. It is not neglect so much as a form of thrift, a conservation of the warmth that has been earned through hours of movement and work. Water, now, is for drinking or cooking, not for washing away the day. The basin in the corner is nearly empty, what remains too cold to tempt even the most fastidious. And so, hands that have handled coal, that have brushed against the rough brick of the hearth, that have carried wood in from the yard, are rubbed clean enough with a cloth and left at that. Faces may be wiped if the soot has been heavy, but otherwise the cold will be allowed to do its own work of stilling and preserving. The children slip into bed first, wriggling down into the center where the warmth will gather most. Their hair smells faintly of the room itself, of smoke, of damp wool, of the faint sweetness of straw that lingers in the mattress beneath them. A parent follows, adjusting the blanket to cover every edge, tucking it under bodies so that the heat cannot escape. In these moments, the bed is less a piece of furniture than a small fortress. The walls built not of stone but of cloth, and the press of bodies. The intimacy is unchosen but not unwelcome. It is simply the shape of survival here, the way life knits itself together against the cold. Outside, the frost is deepening again, creeping along the edges of the window panes in delicate white fingers. The sounds of the city have dimmed to almost nothing, the occasional wheel on cobblestone, the distant call of a night watchman, the muffled clop of a horse's hooves somewhere far off. Inside, the house listens to its own quiet, the faint creak of the bed frame as someone shifts, the whisper of a blanket being pulled tighter, the almost imperceptible sigh of someone sinking further into sleep. And all the while, the air inside grows denser with the warmth of breathing, with the shared scent of those who will spend these hours together until morning. Hygiene, in these nights, is not a matter of daily perfection but of occasional interruption. A sheet may be shaken out when the weather offers a rare, mild day. A shirt may be brushed and sponged to freshen it without removing the deeper traces of wear. But in this season, nothing is wasted, not the heat stored in a garment, not the faint insulation of cloth that has been slept in for weeks. To a modern eye, it might seem an abdication of cleanliness. To those who live it, it is simple arithmetic. Warmth first, comfort second, the ideal of fresh linen last. There will be time for soap and scalding water when the air does not bite so hard, when fingers can move freely without the ache of cold, when a garment hung to dry will not freeze into a stiff, unwearable shape before the night is out. In the deepest part of the night, when the room is steeped in darkness and even the fire's embers are only a memory, the family sleeps within the world. They have made an air that holds their scent, a bed that has learned the shape of their bodies, a rhythm that repeats itself from one night to the next until the season turns. There is no sharp division between the clean and the unclean here, no daily reset. There is only the slow, steady layering of life as it is lived in the coldest nights of the year. And as strange as it might seem to us, there is a certain quiet dignity in that. A resilience woven into every fiber of the room, every breath of the air, every crease of the blankets that hold them safe until morning. There is a certain heaviness to the air that settles in by the middle of winter, not the suffocating weight of something spoiled, but the slow, patient layering of days lived in close quarters without the release of a warm breeze or the cleansing rush of running water. It is as if the room itself has been breathing alongside its occupants, inhaling the damp of their clothes, the faint musk of skin long wrapped in wool, the subtle imprint of meals cooked over a modest fire, and then holding it all close in its wooden frame. The walls have learned to keep secrets. They carry the scent of smoke from years of winters past, the way books carry the faint perfume of every hand that has turned their pages. You might not notice it immediately, but stay here long enough, and the room will begin to speak in its own language of fires that burned low, of nights when the frost pushed against the glass so hard it seemed to be testing for weakness, of mornings when the water in the basin had frozen hard enough to crack the enamel if struck too sharply. And through it all, the people here have moved gently within the boundaries of what the season allows, each action tempered by the knowledge that warmth is fragile and must be preserved with care. By evening, when the dim winter light fades as if someone has quietly drawn a curtain across the sky, the patterns of the day have already folded themselves back toward the hearth and the bed. There is no thought of bathing in this season. Even the idea of it seems a distant luxury, belonging to summers when water could be heated in abundance, and the drying of skin and hair did not invite a chill that lingers in the bones. The closest they come to such rituals now is the wiping of hands with a damp cloth, perhaps the rinsing of a face if the soot from the fire has clung too visibly. Clothes remain on, not just because they are the only barrier against the cold, but because they hold the day's accumulated warmth, a kind of stored energy that would be foolish to throw away for the sake of some abstract cleanliness. And so the garments deepen in color, not from dye, but from time, taking on the particular sheen of fabric that has been worn, slept in, and relied upon for weeks without a wash. When they gather again in the narrow bed, the act is more than the search for rest. It is a deliberate weaving together of heat, a joining of bodies that turns the small space into a furnace of shared breath. The youngest, quick to claim the middle, burrow between parents or siblings, their limbs a tangle beneath the blanket, their hair carrying the faint fragrance of the room they all inhabit, wool, smoke, a trace of something earthy that clings from the streets outside. The blanket itself, though heavy, is not the plush comfort one might imagine. It is dense and slightly scratchy, the kind of wool that pricks faintly against the skin but traps the heat so completely that its roughness is a small price to pay. Over time, it too has become a kind of archive, holding the scent of seasons past, the dust of the house, and the faint oil of skin that seeps into fibers and never entirely leaves. The floor beneath them holds its own record of winter small drifts of ash that escape the hearth, crumbs from hurried meals, the fine powder of coal dust that seems to float invisibly until it settles into the grain of the wood. It is swept when the weather permits, but on the coldest days it is left alone. To sweep is to stir the air, to chase out what little warmth there is, and so the dust remains, a quiet witness to the weeks as they pass. It does not offend them the way it might us. It is simply part of the season, as inevitable as the frost on the window or the numbness in fingers after a walk outside. Outside the walls, the city wears its own winter scent, a mingling of chimney smoke, damp stone, and the faint metallic tang of frost in the air. It seeps in through every crack, finding its way into the room to mix with the heavier, more human atmosphere inside. This mingling of airs is what they breathe each night, their lungs drawing in a blend of the world beyond their home and the world they have made within it. And in this way, the outside and the inside are never truly separate. Each is carried into the other on clothes, on skin, in the folds of a scarf, or the soles of boots. If you watch them in these hours before true sleep, you will see that there is no restless pacing, no urgent tidying. The work of the day is done, and the night is for conserving what they have gathered, the warmth in their bodies, the strength in their limbs, the thin thread of comfort that runs through the season like a lifeline. They settle themselves as one might arrange embers in a fire close enough to glow, careful not to waste the heat. The air grows heavier with their nearness, with the exchange of breath, and the slow, steady exhalation of the bed itself, which releases the day's warmth into the cocoon they have made. And though by our standards they are unwashed, wrapped in clothes that have known too many days, to them this is not deprivation but life as it must be lived until the thaw comes. Somewhere outside, a late cart passes, its wheels cracking over the frozen ground, but here the sound is muffled, as though the frost itself were absorbing it. The night stretches ahead, a long, unbroken ribbon of hours in which nothing will change except the depth of the cold and the closeness of the bodies that defy it. And when morning comes, they will rise again into the same air, the same clothes, the same slow negotiation between the comfort of cleanliness and the necessity of warmth. It is not romance, nor is it misery. It is the quiet mathematics of survival, a calculation made without complaint, carried forward one breath, one night, one winter at a time. There comes a point, deep into the winter, when even the cold seems to have grown tired of announcing itself, and instead settles into every surface, every breath, as if it has always been there. It is no longer a sharp visitor at the door, but an old tenant, silent and persistent, shaping the very way the family moves through its hours. By the 7th or 8th week of frost, the walls hold not only the damp but the faint smell of life, lived without the full cleansing of water wool that has drunk in smoke. Shirts that have kept their owner's shape for so many days they might as well be another layer of skin, bedding that has folded night after night's warmth into itself until it feels almost alive. The children no longer ask about baths, because the word itself feels like it belongs to another season, another kind of life. Instead, they learn to wipe their faces with a cloth warmed briefly by the fire, rubbing the skin pink and calling it done. Their hair is brushed but rarely washed, and in the lamplight you can see the way it reflects not only the glow of the flame but the sheen of natural oils, a kind of built-in protection against the raw air. The parents, too, have adapted to this rhythm so completely that the thought of laundering an entire set of clothes in the heart of January would be almost laughable. To remove the layers that have been worn for days, sometimes weeks, would be to shed the thin wall they've built between themselves and the cold. Washing them would mean not only braving the icy water but enduring the long, shivering wait while they dried, never quite fast enough in a house where the hearth's heat is guarded like treasure. and so they keep them on, brushing away the most visible dust, shaking out the crumbs, and trusting the rest to wait for spring. There is no shame in it here. In fact, it is almost a quiet point of pride, an unspoken understanding between them that surviving the cold without falling ill matters more than any gleam of soap on linen. At night, when the lamps are dimmed and the fire allowed to fade to its last embers, they retreat once more to the bed. It is as though the bed itself has become a second home inside the house, a smaller, warmer country bounded by blankets and the heat of pressed bodies. The smell here is complex and layered wood smoke, lanolin from the wool, the faint sharpness of sweat that has long since stopped smelling like labor and has instead blended into something constant, something familiar. It is not the kind of scent one would bottle, but it is the scent of survival, and for those inside it, it is reassuring. They know exactly where they are in the dark by the smell of the air, the texture of the blanket, the weight of another person's breathing nearby. The floor beneath the bed carries its own quiet testament to the season. Dust and ash have gathered in places where the broom has not reached since before the frost set in, mingling with the stray threads from worn garments and the occasional scrap fallen from a meal. This, too, will wait. To sweep now would be to stir the cold from the corners and send it moving through the room again. Better to let it rest until a warmer day makes the act of cleaning less of a theft of comfort. The same logic applies to the windows washed perhaps once before the deep cold came, now left clouded with the fine film of coal smoke and breath that the season brings. It is not beauty they seek now, but the preservation of what little warmth the glass can hold. Outside, the city's breath hangs low over the rooftops, a haze of chimney smoke caught in the still air. The streets are quiet, the few who pass moving quickly, heads bowed, their own layers of unwashed fabric wrapped tightly around them. Inside, the family has stopped measuring the days by the calendar, and instead marks them by small changes in the light, the subtle shift in the way the frost creeps across the window, the moments when the cold feels less like an attack and more like a companion who will not yet leave. Hygiene here is a series of compromises, and they make them without bitterness. A freshened face is enough. Clean hands, when possible, are enough. The rest is for later. In these nights, time does not move in sharp divisions, but in long, slow waves, the kind that carry you almost without your noticing from one day into the next. The air in the room thickens with their presence, the mingled scent of all they have worn and all they have done folding into it, until it feels as much a part of them as their own skin. And when they finally close their eyes, drawing the blankets up to their chins, it is into this air that they breathe, steady and untroubled, knowing that they have made it through another day without yielding to the cold's quiet insistence. It is not the cleanliness of summer. No, this is the cleanliness of endurance, of choosing warmth over ritual, of trusting that there will be a time again for soap and sunlit linens. But tonight, in the heart of winter, the bed is warm, the room is theirs, and that is enough. There is a certain hour in the long midwinter nights when the darkness feels older than the house itself, when it seems to press down from the rafters and rise up from the floorboards all at once, a slow and steady weight that settles over everything. In that hour, the fire has long since surrendered its last flame, and even the embers have drawn inward, glowing faintly as though reluctant to share what little warmth remains. The room, now lit only by the soft haze of moonlight through frost-laced glass, reveals the small truths of a winter lived without the daily rituals of full washing. The blanket that covers them has grown heavy with use, its fibers thickened by the mingling of countless nights' breaths, the faint oil of skin, and the dust that drifts invisibly through the room to settle where the air is still. It smells of wool and smoke, but also of the human closeness that has pressed into it for weeks, an intimacy that is not chosen for romance but accepted as necessity, as sure and unquestioned as the beating of one's heart. Beneath it, the layers of clothing worn to bed carry their own quiet history. The stiffness in a cuff where a drop of broth once dried and was never washed away. The faint crease in a sleeve from where it was folded over an arm night after night. The air here is thick but not oppressive, like a well-worn coat that has taken on the scent of every journey made in it, holding those memories without judgment. They do not stir much at this hour, for movement invites the cold to find its way into the small pockets of heat they have built together. Even turning in bed is done with care, so as not to tug the blanket away from another. The smallest sound, the creak of the frame, the shift of straw beneath the mattress, feels amplified in the stillness, carrying across the room as though the air itself were listening. Outside, the city is equally still. The night watchman's boots muffled by frost, the last echoes of the evening long gone. The world beyond their window has folded in on itself. And here inside, the family has done the same, drawing in their warmth and their breath, letting the rest wait until daylight. In these nights, hygiene is not the pursuit of some distant ideal, but the quiet negotiation between what must be done and what can be endured. A basin of water sits untouched on the table, its surface hardened into a thin, glassy shell that would shatter at the first touch. It will be used in the morning, perhaps to wipe a face or rinse hands, but for now it is only a silent witness to the cold, reflecting the faint silver of the moon. The soap beside it is worn thin, its sharp scent muted by the air around it, and even it seems to know that its work will be done sparingly, saved for what shows to the world. Beneath the layers of cloth and blanket, the skin waits, unwashed but not uncared for, preserved in the warmth of shared breath, protected from the raw bite of winter air. The floor, though unseen in the dimness, tells the same story. Weeks of ash from the hearth have gathered in the seams of the boards, mingled with the fine grit of coal dust and the faint traces of life, threads from a hem, a button lost in the folds of a skirt, crumbs from a meal eaten too quickly to notice where they fell. These are not swept away nightly, for to stir the air now would be to invite the cold to settle deeper into the room. They will remain until a warmer day makes such labor worth the cost, until the act of cleaning no longer steals more heat than it restores. And yet, despite what might seem like neglect to another eye, there is a kind of discipline here, a careful order that shapes each night. The bed is made tight against drafts, the children placed where they will be warmest, the adults at the edges to guard against the cold that creeps in from the walls. Each layer of blanket is smoothed, each edge tucked under, every small action done with the knowledge that warmth is a fragile thing and must be defended without pause. They know the smell of their own winter air, and it does not trouble them. It is simply the scent of home in this season, carrying the weight of days and nights survived together. Somewhere in the small hours, sleep deepens, and the breath of the sleepers grows slow and even. The frost outside thickens, sketching new patterns across the glass, delicate ferns that will vanish with the first touch of morning light. Inside, the air grows warmer by degrees, the shared heat of the bed pushing gently back against the cold's patient advance. It is here, in this fragile balance, that the unwashed and the unheated become not symbols of hardship, but the quiet tools of endurance. And as the night wears on, the family rests in the knowledge that they have held the cold at bay for another turn of the clock, that in the stillness of this room, they have everything they need until the dawn comes to call them back into the day. By the time the winter has sunk so deep into the bones of the house that even the walls seem to have forgotten the feel of summer, the rhythm of these nights has become a kind of second nature, not to be questioned or resisted. The air inside no longer feels separate from the people who breathe it. It has taken on their scent, their warmth, their quiet endurance, until it is impossible to say where the household ends and the atmosphere begins. Every corner holds the memory of breath, of the faint steam that rises from damp stockings near the hearth, of the smoke that curls lazily from the last bit of coal before it gives itself up to ash. The blankets are heavier now than when the season began, not with added layers, but with the slow weight of days, fibers thickened by the oil of skin, by the dust that drifts from the rafters, by the tiny crumbs of life that settle without ceremony into every fold. And yet, this heaviness is not resented. It is embraced, for it means the bed is warmer, more impenetrable to the chill that prowls just outside its edge. Clothing is no longer thought of in terms of clean or soiled, only in terms of warmth retained and skin shielded. A shirt that has been worn through weeks of frost is as much a talisman as any object of faith. It has learned the body's shape, carries its heat, and guards it fiercely. To wash it now would be to strip away that bond, to return it to the cold innocence of cloth that has not yet served. And so, each garment becomes a companion, carrying with it the faint perfume of smoke, the echo of streets walked, the hours of labor, the press of blankets in the night. The thought of soap is not unwelcome, only distant, like the memory of a summer fruit that will not be tasted again until the season turns. The floor bears its own winter signature, the fine scatter of ash that has escaped the hearth, the dust that clings to the hem of a skirt, the minute grit carried in on boots and never fully shaken out. No one bends to sweep it now. The cold is too jealous of its hold on the air, and stirring it would only wake its bite. Instead, the dust settles into the quiet, becoming part of the room's texture, another layer of the unspoken truce between the family and the season. It will be swept away when the windows can be opened without bleeding the heat from the house, when the act of cleaning no longer means inviting in the cold. And so the days pass, folding into nights that are indistinguishable except for the subtle ways the frost marks the window pane, the patterns shifting as if the cold itself is sketching its own slow art. The family no longer counts the weeks until spring. They count only the nights survived, the mornings when they wake and find that the thin shell of warmth they have built has held. In this life, hygiene is a careful economy. The visible is tended to a face washed, a collar brushed, hands wiped clean enough for whatever the day demands. The rest is left as it is, not from neglect, but from the understanding that the body will endure more safely if it carries the season's weight with it, like armor. At night, as they settle once again into the bed's narrow country, there is no talk of what might be done differently, no longing for what cannot be had. The air, thick with the smell of wool and the faint sweetness of straw beneath the mattress, is their inheritance for these months. They breathe it without hesitation, as one breathes the air of a familiar room after a long absence full of memory, of quiet proof that they belong here. The cold may own the streets, the rooftops, the stones, but inside, under these blankets, in the dim circle of lamplight, the family holds its own ground. And in that ground, unwashed though it may be, there is a dignity that no frost can touch. By the time the season has sunk into its deepest quiet, the cold no longer feels like something arriving from outside, but like a presence that has always lived in the bones of the house, as if the walls themselves were carved from winter. Each night folds into the next without sharp edges, the hours dissolving into one another beneath the same heavy blankets, the same low light of the lamp, burning just long enough to guide the last movements before sleep. The smell of the room has reached a kind of permanence now, no longer shifting between the day's work and the night's stillness, but settled, anchored, woven into every fiber of cloth and every plank of the floor. It is the smell of smoke that has lost its fire, of wool that has carried warmth without interruption, of skin that has been kept from the air so long it carries its own muted perfume, neither sweet nor sour, but something in between, something that speaks not of neglect, but of unbroken continuity. Clothing clings with a loyalty almost human, molded to the body by weeks of wear, holding in its seams the memory of every shiver resisted and every breath held close beneath the covers. Even the small imperfections, the faint shine where elbows have worn the weave smooth, the soft, stiff edges where a drop of tea dried unnoticed, become part of the fabric's identity, familiar as the lines on a palm. To wash it now would be to strip away not dirt alone, but the very proof of its service. The bed has become more than a place to lie down. It is a country with its own borders, defended each night against the creeping frost. The blanket's weight is a constant, pressing down not as a burden but as a reassurance, holding the night's warmth in place. Beneath it, bodies curve toward one another by instinct, filling the gaps where cold might enter. The smell here is its own world, denser than the air of the room. Warm enough to carry the faint salt of skin, the earthy hint of straw packed into the mattress, the smoky echo of the hearth. It is a scent that belongs only to them, built layer by layer over the course of the season, and though another might recoil from its intimacy, here it is a comfort, a marker of safety. In the darkness, there is no question of who is near. Breath and warmth and scent are as recognizable as a voice in daylight. Beyond the bed, the room holds its stillness like a secret. The floor keeps its scatter of ash and dust, settled into the quiet as if it were meant to be there. The windows remain dressed in frost, their glass clouded with the slow exhalations of those sleeping nearby. Every object is patient, the basin of water, untouched until morning, the bar of soap, worn thin and waiting for a season when it will be called upon without hesitation. The broom in the corner, leaning like an old friend who knows that its turn will come again, but not tonight. These things are not neglected, they are simply resting, like everything else. until the balance between warmth and cleanliness tips back toward the latter. Outside, the city lies beneath a skin of silence, the streets so empty that the sound of a single set of footsteps would seem like a shout. The frost makes its own slow music on the eaves, the faint crack and shift of ice expanding. But inside there is only the rhythm of breathing, the occasional sigh as a sleeper drifts deeper into the warmth. The world beyond the walls could be gone entirely for all they know. Here, in this cocoon, only the cold's patience and their own endurance matter. They have come to understand that survival is not always loud or heroic. It is often as simple as knowing when to hold still, when to keep what you have, when to wait without complaint for the return of light and warmth. In this final stretch of winter's hold, the unwashed is not a flaw to be erased, but a thread in the fabric of their resilience. It is proof that they have lived through each day without yielding more heat than they could spare, that they have chosen the nearness of one another over the chill that comes with the ritual of soap and water. And so, each night, they draw the blankets tighter, press closer in the bed's narrow borders, and let the cold remain where it belongs outside the fortress they have built with breath, with cloth, with patience. They will emerge when the season allows. But for now, in this long and unbroken night, they have all they need. And so the season begins to loosen its grip, not in a rush of melting snow or a sudden burst of sunlight, but in small, almost imperceptible concessions, the frost on the glass thinning sooner in the morning, the shadows in the room shifting with a fraction more light, the sound of water dripping somewhere beyond the window where ice has begun to yield. Inside, the air feels different, though it still carries the familiar weight of weeks lived in close quarters. There is a faint lift to it now, as though it too has sensed that the long night is nearing its end. The bed remains the fortress it has always been, heavy with blankets and the accumulated warmth of countless nights. But the urgency with which bodies cling together has softened. There are moments now when someone turns without the fear of letting in a fatal draft, when a hand can be stretched briefly into the cool edge of the covers without recoiling. The clothes, still unwashed, still shaped by the long embrace of winter, begin to feel less like armor and more like keepsakes, each one carrying the quiet story of its service through the hardest months. Soon they will be shed, one by one, but for now they remain, faithful to the very end. The floor still holds its winter script ash in the seams, a fine coat of dust, the scatter of crumbs, but the promise of its clearing is near enough to taste. The broom waits in its corner, patient but expectant, knowing that the day will come when windows will be flung open without fear, when air will move freely through the room, sweeping away the season's breath. The basin, too, seems to sense its coming role. The ice will not return to its surface once it is gone, and water will be poured without hesitation, splashed across skin with the luxury of not counting the cost in lost heat. Even the soap, dulled to a thin sliver, will take on a new life when the warmth returns, its sharp scent once again a companion instead of a challenge. And yet, there is something in these last days of cold that they will miss, though they may never admit it aloud. The closeness, born of necessity, has woven itself into the fabric of their lives so tightly that to pull it away feels almost unnatural. In summer, they will have space again, space in the bed, in the air, in the days, but it will not be the same space that winter shapes, the space that holds every breath like a secret, that teaches the worth of warmth by showing its absence. The unwashed layers, the air dense with shared life, the walls steeped in smoke and patience, these will dissolve, replaced by fresh linens and open windows, but somewhere in the memory they will remain, a quiet reminder that survival can be as humble as it is fierce. Outside, the thaw will quicken, and the city will stir from its frost-bound stillness, the streets filling once more with voices and footsteps. But here, in this room that has known so many nights of holding the cold at bay, the change will come gently. A window opened for an hour, the first airing of the bedding in the pale sun, the slow transformation of garments from winter companions to laundry on a line. And as these things happen, the air inside will change too, losing some of its weight, gaining a lightness that will carry them into the months ahead. Still, they will remember what it was to breathe this winter air, to live in its thick embrace, to measure time not by the calendar but by the number of nights endured together. And as you listen now, perhaps you can imagine the softness of those final nights, the way the cold slips away, not in defeat but in a slow retreat, leaving behind the proof of what it shaped. Perhaps you can feel, even at this distance, the quiet pride of having kept the frost on the other side of the glass, of having chosen warmth over ritual, endurance over ease. It is not a story of grand triumphs, but of the kind that matters most, the kind where morning comes and everyone is still here to see it. And maybe, when the last trace of winter is gone and the air smells of new things, they will remember the unwashed bed and the heavy blankets and the air that was theirs alone, and they will know that in those nights they had all they truly needed. So if you have traveled with me through these long, dark hours, through the still rooms and the frostbitten panes, take a moment to hold the weight of it before you let it go. And if you wish to walk again through other forgotten winters, to sit by other dimming fires, to breathe the air of other lives, then come back tomorrow, and we will begin again. Until then, rest well, keep warm, and let the night carry you.